The early 70s were perhaps the golden age of overblown and pretentious rock music. Progressive rock and glam were highly popular, and concept albums and rock operas were everywhere. From newer acts like David Bowie, Yes, and Genesis, to older acts like The Who, everybody was doing it. Which brings us to another band I have wanted to talk about for ages. The Kinks. The Kinks are the best classic rock band that you've only ever heard a song or two from. For whatever reason, these guys just never really made the big time in the same way that other 60s pop bands did. Maybe they were just too overtly British to really do well outside of their native land. In any case, the albums the Kinks released from 1966 to 1969 are some of the finest albums ever released by anyone. Particularly the last two albums. The Kinks are the Village Green Preservation Society, a loose concept album about nostalgia for the rural England of days gone by, and Arthur, a rock opera that uses the life of an old man as a metaphor for the fall of the British Empire. And while the Kinks' early 70s output isn't as good as those mythical heights of 66 to 69, it's still pretty good and definitely worth checking out. At least up until 1973. That was the year that the Kinks released Preservation Act 1. The idea to revisit the themes and setting of the Village Green Preservation Society first occurred to Ray Davies in 1972, when he was preparing a stage show to celebrate Britain's entry into the European Economic Community. And that's where the concept of Preservation, a triple-disc rock opera sequel album to the Village Green Preservation Society, came into being. Now, I do feel the need to mention that this wasn't originally supposed to be a triple album. It was supposed to be a double album, but under the weight of personal issues on Ray Davies' part, dissatisfaction with the final mix, and a lot of pressure from the record company to put out a product in 1973, the band put out Act 1 as a separate intro to the piece, with the intention that Act 2 would be the main attraction. Upon the album's release in 1973, it was savaged by the critics, and largely continues to be to this day. In fact, the two Preservation albums are considered by most people to be the point where Ray Davies' talent finally ran out, and the Kinks start to really suck. But is that an accurate assessment to these two albums? Let's find out. This is interesting. I get what they were going for here. I get that the operatic vocals and the orchestral flourish is obviously supposed to represent the sunrise, but I'm not really sure why this needed to be its own track. And furthermore, so many Kinks albums have intros that stick with you forever. You know, who could forget the phone ringing on Face to Face? The fa-fa-fas of David Watts on Something Else. Whereas on Preservation Act 1, we have some melodramatic humming. Daylight is much better, although in many ways the song is just standard Kinks fare, describing the early morning routine of the villagers. And I do love the parts of the songs with the horns, which have lots of the sort of miniature character studies that Ray Davies is so good at.
Middle-aged bankers crack their backs and wish they were young and in their teens. Lonely spinsters dream of dating Roger Moore or Steve McQueen. Health fanatics in their attics training for the once under a scarlet sky.
Sweet Lady Genevieve is fantastic, quite possibly the best thing on this whole album. It introduces us to the character of the Tramp, who we will see at least one more time on this album, and who will play a huge role in Act 2, and it describes him trying to win back a woman who he wronged in his youth. It's got a great chorus and a melody that will stay in your head for, wait a minute. This is the continuing adventures of Bungalow Bill by the Beatles.
Hey, Bungalow Bill, what did you kill? Bungalow Bill.
The way way that A Change in the Weather starts, you would think that we were getting a gruff hard rock song, but the reality is that about 45 seconds in, the song transitions into this.
I think the weather's changing. I hope the weather is gonna change.
Which sounds like something out of an especially florid Broadway musical. But I like it. I like this track quite a bit as well. It's very Bob Dylan-ish, and it basically consists of Ray talking about all the things that have transpired over the past 10 years and asking, well, where are they now? This is the part of the album where I start raising my eyebrow and questioning, is this actually a rock opera? Are we actually going to get to the rock opera bits of this album? Because so far, I'm not really getting a sense of plot here. Now this song is fantastic, the sort of glammy throwback to 50s rock and roll that was very much in vogue during the period when this album came out. Think Ziggy era Bowie or Sticky Fingers era Rolling Stones. Lyrically, it's a direct throwback to the Village Green Preservation Society as well as a sequel to the song Johnny Thunder, describing how he's still a rebel listening to his rock and roll records and refusing to settle down, even though his hair's turning gray and he's getting older. This song is not very good, but considering the lyrical content, I'm not sure that it's meant to be. It's supposed to be the vicar of the Village Green giving a sermon using probably the most awful metaphor for life that I've ever heard. This is definitely my favorite song on this album, not written by John Lennon originally. The first part, Money and Corruption, is a fantastic political song about how corrupt politicians betray the working person and only serve their own self-interests. A theme that is almost more relevant in 2017 than it was in 1973, which is impressive considering that Richard Nixon was president at that time. The I Am Your Man section of this song introduces us to the second of the three main characters, Mr. Black, a left-wing politician who promises a perfect utopia free from capitalistic oppression if we only go his way. And the song represents the appeal of such a figure incredibly well. This song introduces us to the third main character, the greedy, malevolent capitalist Mr. Flash, and I love this song too. I love the energy, I love the ridiculously cartoonish picture the song paints of Flash as this boogeyman of pure evil come to desecrate and defile everything, and I love the operatic female vocals. I could criticize this song for a number of things, from having a lyrical subject matter that we've heard before from these guys, or the fact that the music sounds very much like it did on the Village Green. However, I'll give this song a pass today because I genuinely like it. It's another song from the perspective of the Tramp where he talks about just sitting around and how he'd rather be a hobo than have to deal with the worries and troubles of the world. And it's quite pleasant, even if it does sound like a rewrite of something they did 5 years earlier. And so the album ends on a bleak note with Flash and his cronies plotting and carrying out the destruction of the Village Green, tearing down the old houses, building new ones, and in general gentrifying and destroying the once quaint community. And I think the song is okay, although the female vocals singing Demolition do kind of get on my nerves at times. This album is okay. If I were in a particularly generous mood, I might even say it was good. It's not the complete nadir of the Kinks' career that it's usually painted as, but it's certainly not a masterpiece of any kind. I was not at all surprised to find out that this was a rushed project, because listening to this album, about 2/3 of it just sounds like early 70s Kinks on autopilot. And that's alright with me, because I like the Kinks a lot. But I could easily see how that could be a major turnoff for many people. As a sequel to the Village Green Preservation Society, this album is a total disappointment, but really that was inevitable. When he wrote the Village Green Preservation Society, Ray Davies was near the climax of one of the biggest winning streaks in the history of 60s rock music. Whereas by the time he was working on this project, he was not in anywhere near as good a place. Now, in terms of the plot, I'm going to lay off on criticizing it until we get to Act 2, which is where most of the action of Preservation really takes place. But suffice to say, this has fairly little to do with the actual events of Preservation, and is mostly just an intro. If you wanted to, you could skip this album altogether and go straight to Preservation Act 2 and lose almost nothing in the process. Ultimately, this album is okay for what it is, and if you're a Kinks diehard the way I am, you'll probably enjoy it. Don't avoid this album forever, but definitely make sure you have all of their 60s and early 70s stuff before you get it.